Hey everyone, it's Jananie. So I've been thinking a lot about how my reading tastes have changed over the past year, and I thought it was high time to do another recommendation video of adult books that you can read if you usually read YA. So for those of you who have been watching my channel for a while, you know that I have been a huge YA reader. For those of you who don't know what YA means, it means young adult. Young adult books are a wonderful category of books that are about mainly teens or slightly younger protagonists who are going through very coming of age struggles. And as someone who recently just turned 25, I think I am definitely growing out of the category, out of that age category. And although it has brought me so much joy over my teen years and even through my early 20s. I think at this point in my life, as I move into different life stages, I want books that I can relate to a little bit more, that have some of the struggles that I am currently going through, and that have broader themes that are beyond just the main characters sort of coming of age or their experiences with first love or their first time in many different situations. So as someone who struggled with finding adult books that I actually liked and that I was into as I shifted into that category of books, I thought I would help you guys out. So I've done this video once before. You can definitely go check that one out. I'll leave it linked down below. But in that video, I kept it pretty vague and I just recommended a few of the books that I had read at the time. This time I have 3 different categories of books to recommend. I'll be going through books that deal with university settings or school settings that are not high school and that help you bridge that gap between like high school and the working world. So like grad school, university, that kind of age. And then the second category of books I will be doing is romances and also books that deal with different social themes. So books that have a lot broader themes, but they tend to have some younger protagonists or follow protagonists over a longer period of their life. And then the last category of books I will be recommending is just a bunch of fantasies that I love that feature slightly younger protagonists that I feel like are a bit more accessible to get into as someone moving into adult for the first time. So with all of that said, I'm super excited to recommend all of these books today. I think I have about 20-ish books to recommend. But before we get into all those books, I did want to talk a little bit about the sponsor of today's video, which is Scentbird. So Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service, and you get to choose a new designer fragrance each month for only $17. Your fragrances will come in these handy little vials that are actually 8 times a regular fragrance sample. They are so compact and really easy to take around with you. What I find really great about Scentbird is that you have over 600 designer brands to choose from. This ranges from like Prada, Gucci, Versace, Burberry, like literally anything you can think of, they probably have it at Scentbird. And it's also pretty versatile. They have perfumes, colognes, and also unisex options as well. You get a whole 30-day supply in these wonderful little vials, which you just like spritz like that. They're really awesome. And with Scentbird, you can also skip your subscription any month without any penalties. And on the flip side, if you would like to get more scents for a specific month, you can upgrade to 2 or 3. I have an interesting relationship with scents and fragrances, mainly because I don't know too much about them and I've always struggled to find the scent that I like. Me being the fickle person that I am, I want to try out different scents. So I just end up in this like weird conundrum with these bottles just gathering dust. But I'm really excited by Scentbird and this whole idea because it makes it super easy to try new scents and like switch up your scent for a different season. So I did want to show you the different scents that Scentbird sent me. So I have 5 of them. The first is this Dolce & Gabbana light blue scent. This one gives me a lot of fall vibes. Actually, it gives me like cedar and musk notes, but it's also got lemon, Granny Smith apple, and bamboo. Next, I have one that's perfect for the summer and just something I know I'll be wearing when it's just florally and fun outside. And that is the Burberry Brit Sheer. This one has notes of peony, yuzu, peach blossom, musk, and pineapple. Next, I have another pretty refreshing and fresh one, and that is the DKNY Delicious. I just love that name. It's got notes of green apple, grapefruit, cucumber, tuberose, and white woods. Next, I have one that's definitely gonna make me feel like a bad bitch, and that is the Confessions of a Rebel Bitch Please scent, which just love the name. This one has notes of blackcurrant, jasmine, sandalwood, and skin musk. And then finally, I have another sort of girly, cute scent, and that is the Versace Bright Crystal Absolute. And this one has notes of peony, raspberry, yuzu, pomegranate, and musk. Scentbird is just so great if you're like me and you can't commit to a specific scent, or you want to be able to switch it up more often, and you want to try designer brands but also get some really great value. So with all that said, I think you should definitely go check out Scentbird. They have a wonderful quiz online as well if you need some help trying to figure out which fragrance to get. Make sure to go click the link in my description and use my code JEN-nah-nee, and you can get 55% off your first month with that code. And that makes it only $8 for your first month, which is a pretty sweet deal. Not only that, I'm really excited to say that Scentbird is now available in Canada. As you guys may know, I am Canadian, so I'm really excited for all my Canadian viewers to be able to take advantage of this deal. Thank you so much to Scentbird for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into my adult book recs for YA readers. Alrighty, let's get into the first category of books that I have for this video, which is mainly books that are set in university or feature characters that are in that university age or like early 20s and who are just like going through it. Some of these also have school settings and then some of them don't, so there's a bit of a variety as well. First up, I have You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat. This features a Palestinian American main character. She's in her early 20s. I believe she's still in university as well, but she's going through some really troubling mental health struggles, and she also has this really complicated relationship with her mother. And I think those two aspects really inform the story and move it forward, and I think it makes for a really compelling read if you are in that transitionary phase from YA to adult, growing from a teen into an adult, and you're trying to just figure your shit out. This is a book of a girl just like going through it, and I think for that reason it's really, really relatable. And there were just so many lines in this book that I underlined and tabbed because they were just so freaking relatable. I think one thing that I love about this book is that the main character is someone who just really feels all of the emotions. She exists too much, as her mother tells her, and I think that's a feeling that you definitely feel going through that transitionary period, like graduating college and like getting into your 20s and feeling like the world is gonna end if one thing goes wrong. And I honestly just related to so many parts of this. And this one's not too dark or depressing, and I think it has its light moments as well, so I think it's a well-rounded read overall. Next, I have a bit of a quirky little book rec, and that is Bunny by Mona Awad. This book is a really popular one all over BookTube, and it features a main character who is in a graduate fiction writing program, and she's definitely in that like early 20s age, sort of going through it. And this one talks about female friendships and has a bit of a satirical element to it. It's also got a bit of a horror-y, magical element to it, I would say, but I think what's fun about this one is that it's a bit of a unreliable narrator. You get some really quirky characters and weird things going on, but it's also quite relatable in the sense that the main character's just like going through it. There's a lot going on. She doesn't really know what she's doing. And I think it's interesting to someone who is transitioning out of YA just because it deals with that like time period in someone's life when you're like growing out of your teens and getting into the adult world. But it also deals with like female friendships in a way that I think is interesting for someone who is struggling to make friends in their adult life, and sort of the peer pressure aspect of things and wanting to fit in with people who are like you. Next, I have one that could be a hit or miss, and that one is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I know people who love Sally Rooney. I know people who hate Sally Rooney. I particularly only love this book by her, and I hate the rest of her books. But the reason I like this one is because I really related to the main character in this book. She is a person who is going through it. She has a very messy life, and she's also someone who just has a really hard time dealing with her emotions and like her relationships and just being an active participant in things. And I think that can be partly relatable. This book mainly revolves around the main character's affair with this man who is the husband of this like woman that she knows. But there's also this aspect of sort of a love square going on. But then we've also got the aspect of the main character's mental health struggles and struggling with money and like some stuff with her family and just all these different things that come together. And I think if you are in your early 20s, this is definitely a book that's super, super relatable in so many ways. And this one also, similar to Bunny, has an aspect of female friendships and how complicated those can be. Next, I have another one that's sort of set in university and in school, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This one I'm still in the middle of, but I am close to finishing and I'm loving it. And this one is more of a fantasy, but I did want to recommend it here because it deals with like that university age. But actually the main character in this book does age throughout the book. So it starts when he's quite young and then it ages until he's in university, and it might go further. I'm not at the end of this book yet, but I think this one is fun if you are someone aging out of YA and wanting to get into adult, because this does deal with a lot more broader themes and different concerns than just coming of age, but it still has a lot of that coming of age aspect and being in school and making friends and all of that. And I think for that reason it's really fun, but also just dives deeper into things. So I'm loving this one so far. If you also like fantasy, if you like books that examine colonialism, this is a really great one. Next, I have The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I'm holding up the self-published version because I still haven't gotten around to reading the traditionally published version, but I do think in general this story is a really fun one if you are aging out of YA and getting into adult books. This features a set of 6 characters, all from different backgrounds and locations, all with magical powers of some kind, and they're brought together by this man named Atlas, who has invited them to the Alexandrian Society to compete to become new curators for the Library of Alexandria and like all of this knowledge and the Society of Magicians. And what I love about this one is just mainly the characters and how they're all in this like similar age group, early 20s, and they're going through it. They have their own struggles going on, but they also have these like very interesting interpersonal relationships which are so fascinating to read about, and you will honestly be astounded by the ways that like different people are attracted to each other in this book, which I found really fun. And overall the magic system is super cool as well. So this one definitely deals with sort of that school aspect, them competing together, and the different rivalries, friendships, and love stories that are happening in between. And I feel like this one also taps into that feeling of doing whatever it takes to get to do what you want for the rest of your life. We put so much pressure into getting to be able to do the thing we want for the rest of our lives, for our career or otherwise, and I think this sort of delves into that aspect, but metaphorically. And then the last book that I have for this category is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This one is just a really fun thriller that is set at a university, and it involves a bunch of characters in a bunch of different timelines. It begins with all of them coming back to their university for a reunion 10 years after they graduated. But what you'll learn is that there's a lot of drama and secrets between these different characters, and 10 years ago when they were all in college together, a murder occurred, and although one person was suspected, no one was eventually arrested, and everyone sort of parted ways. And so they're at this reunion trying to figure out what actually happened back then, and it's honestly so much fun. If you love drama, if you love like Gossip Girl-esque secrets, this is a really fun one, and it's also got the thriller aspect to it, so in that way it's just a lot of fun to read. Alrighty, we're on to the second category of books. This is mainly like social dramas or like contemporary fiction, and these range from literary fictions to like romances, but all of them deal with bigger themes, I personally think, than the regular YA contemporary. And most of these I chose over other literary fictions or contemporary fictions because they feature younger protagonists or protagonists that age over the course of the book. So the first one that I have is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I recently read this and absolutely fell in love with it because it's an amazing, fantastic book that examines race in America, and I think it was just a fascinating read. It's about these two Black twin girls who end up growing up in this small town, and as they leave their town and grow up, one of them decides to leave and start passing as white, while the other one continues to live as a Black woman. And this decision to buy the sister who left and decided to pass as white has rippling effects into the lives of her generation, but also the generation below them. And it's just a really fascinating and wonderful story. And what's compelling about this book for someone who's aging out of YA is that the main characters sort of age over the course of the book. And since it's also a multi-generational story, the different characters in the next generation are like a little younger when we meet them. So you're getting that across the book. And overall, you'll just be really intrigued by these character stories and want to know more. And I think it just examines so many different themes and has so much room for discussion, which I think was so much fun. Next, I have another recent favorite of mine, and that is Blue Skin Gods by S.J. Sindhu. We read this for my book club called the Reading Color Book Club, and And this features a protagonist that actually ages over the entire course of the book. So he starts off a very young child and he's like, I think in his mid-20s by the end of the book, which is really nice because you get this sort of coming of age aspect to the book, but also like this growing out of the child phase to the book, which I really, really loved. This basically follows our main character, Kalgi, who is this young boy from Tamil Nadu, India, and he is born with blue skin. And so from his childhood, he has been viewed as a bit of an anomaly and also as a bit of a god. And so his family sort of leans into this idea and they set up an ashram, and many people around the country come to see him and get blessings from him in India. And as the main character starts to get older, he starts to realize that there might be more to the story than he originally thought. And he grows up from this like very sheltered existence into learning so much more and going out to America and finding more about himself and his family and the world around him. And it was just a really interesting story because it has a coming of age aspect, but it deals with so many bigger themes that I think is part of adult books, which I really, really loved. This one's a trip and has some really fascinating characters as well. So if you like really complex characters in your books, this is a really good one to read. The next book is also similar in that it has very complex characters that will make frustrating decisions, and that is Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. This is a recent favorite of mine as well, probably one of my favorite books ever, and I just cannot stop thinking about it. This book is a multi-generational story of this Korean family, and it begins with one of our characters, Sunja, who is this young girl born in Korea and who ends up in this unlikely relationship with this older man and gets pregnant. But when she finds out some secrets about her lover, she decides to take a different marriage proposal that leads her to Japan. And the beginning of this book is actually set during the period when Japan had colonized Korea for many years. And so this book really deals with Koreans in Japan and how that experience was. And it's overall just a really fascinating story that is both so character driven, but also has so many broader historical themes that will just blow your breath away. If you love a really giant cast of characters, if you love really character-driven stories, if you like historical fictions, this is a really great one. And I think what's compelling about this for someone who is moving out of YA into adult books is that the characters in the book all age over the course of the book. So you're like going through each generation as they age up a little bit and you're seeing them go through various struggles. And I think it's compelling in that way because all of them go through different things and you just feel for all of them in so many ways. The next book that I have is not necessarily a contemporary fiction. It is actually a bit of a fantasy, but I'm putting it in this category because honestly, the magical aspect of it and the fantasy aspect of it is so minor compared to the rest of the book. That book is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Although this has a fantasy element to it and a magical element to it, and some of the main characters have some magical abilities, the main crux of the story is actually like a social drama and sort of a Pride and Prejudice-esque situation where the characters are just trying to get into viable marriages for their future and find the perfect match and that kind of thing and falling in love. So this basically follows three different main characters. There are two who were lovers when they were younger but are ripped apart for certain reasons, and the main male character ends up courting the cousin of the original girl to sort of get on her nerves, but then things sort of develop from there. It's a really interesting situation and it has a really beautiful love triangle that I think develops in a really interesting way. I personally felt like it definitely has Pride and Prejudice vibes in the sense that characters who judged each other incorrectly end up learning their lesson and learning more about each other and falling for each other, which I just absolutely love. This is a beautiful love story and one that's also fun because the main character, I would say, which is the younger girl, she is on the younger side. She's sort of growing up. She's going through this phase in her life where she's no longer a kid and she's more of an adult, and she's trying to figure out what that is and trying not to be so naive, which I think is a really interesting sort of moment of growing up, which is really tackled in this book. Next, I have The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. I recommend this every chance I get because it's a fantastic historical fiction. This one is set in Iran in the 1950s and then continues on into later decades as we follow the characters as they age. So this is another one where the main characters start out quite young, they're in their teens, and then they age as the book goes along. This one is a tragic love story between two characters who fall in love very young but get ripped apart for various horrible and just frustrating reasons, but also like reasons larger than themselves. And this one is also a bit of a generational story, I will say, and deals a lot with different themes, not only to do with growing up and like the political situation, but also with like motherhood and with family and with colonialism and with the immigration experience. And it's just such an interesting book that delves into so many things, which I loved. If you love slightly tragic love stories, if you love sweeping sagas, and if you're someone who wants to see a set of characters who fall in love in a naive and young way, but start to learn some hard truths and lessons as they age, this is definitely the one to pick up. Next, I have a book that should be read by everyone because it's fantastic, and that is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This is a book that I read a couple years ago and absolutely fell in love with because the way it's written is just so damn good. This is a literary fiction and sort of social drama and has a really huge like satirical tone to it, I would say, and it follows three different main characters. One is this white woman who is like very wealthy and sort of like an influencer blogger mom, I think. And then the other is this young black girl in her 20s, I think, who is babysitting for this white woman. And then the third main character is a man that the two of them happen to know, and he's also white. And I think what this book does really, really well is take many different perspectives of one situation and show how deluded someone can be thinking that they are right. It really examines race and privilege and all of those aspects and really takes it from the perspective of how the privileged think they can be so in the right, and it's just so, so interesting. What I find appealing about this one for someone who is aging out of YA is that the main character, the young black woman, is quite young. She's not really sure what she's doing, and she is going through this very unique situation with the other characters in this book. And so in that way, I find it relatable, but it's also just like entertaining to watch these characters, all three of them, make such a mess of things. So in that way, I loved it as someone who is aging out of YA. All right, the last one for this category is a straight up romance, but also has some really great social themes to it, and that is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is a new favorite romance for me just because of how beautiful the romance is in this book and how wonderful each of the characters are in their own right. This is a story of two black writers who are reunited after, I think, 10 or 15 years. They had met when they were like teens, and they had this 7-day romance in June, but they were ripped apart for reasons that I won't say now, and they are meeting again as these successful writers, one as a romance writer and one as a literary fiction writer, and they're sort of thrown together in an unlikely situation and end up sort of rekindling that romance from so many years ago. As I said, I really love the characters in this book, and they are such strong people. They've gone through so much, but they have like grown and healed and come out of it on the better side of things, and I really, really loved seeing that. But they were also such vulnerable, beautiful characters when they were younger as well, and when they were falling in love the first time. This is definitely a book of healing and redemption and making things right, which I absolutely loved, and I really, really loved the main male love interest. He was just such a beautiful character. I think he makes some mistakes, but he really comes out of it for the better by the end. And the main girl character is also someone who's like going through this crisis moment in her career, and she's trying to figure things out, so that was also super compelling. I think this is really appealing for someone who is aging out of YA just because the characters in the flashbacks are in high school and they're sort of growing up, and you're seeing how this like formative experience from their teens has affected their lives later on, which I think is just like a compelling storyline to follow. Alrighty, we are on to the final category of books, and this is fantasies that I think sort of appeal to a reader aging out of YA. I think a lot of us who are YA readers tend to love the YA fantasies, so I think these ones have some compelling points to them that take on broader themes and that have characters who are slightly older but not yet much older, and they just have some really interesting journeys as they're going through these epic battles and things. The first one that I have is Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I absolutely love recommending Silvia Moreno Garcia at any chance I get. This one in particular is sort of a alternate reality futuristic version of Mexico City, I think, and it's a sci-fi fantasy because it's got vampires in it. So in this version of our world, vampires are a known phenomenon, and there are these different clans and types of vampires who are sort of enemies and sort of hunting each other at different points. And our main character is a vampire who is on the run, and she ends up enlisting the help of this young man in Mexico City, and she's trying to escape these people who are coming after her, and there's this whole mystery and sort of thriller aspect to it. And then we've also got other side characters who are getting wrapped up in this whole mystery and thriller, and you are getting parts from their perspective as well, which I thought was really compelling. So this one has like a larger cast in some parts, but it's mainly focused on this main character, the vampire, and she's fun to follow because although she's a, you know, ageless vampire, she's quite on the young side, and there's a bit of a romance as well, and I think what she's going through is really compelling. She's got a lot of secrets that she's trying to run away from, and it was just really interesting to follow her as a protagonist. So I think this is a really fun one if you're used to those YA fantasies where the main character is just entering a new world and trying to figure it out, and this one's just fun in that way. Alrighty, the next book that I have is a bit of a trip, and that is Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. This book follows a zillennial main character, so she's in that like early 20s age, and she is following her parents to move to Malaysia to deal with some money troubles, and she's being haunted by the ghost of her grandmother, who is channeling this goddess called the Blackwater Sister to carry out some of her desires and needs. And this involves a huge sort of mystery that's going on in Malaysia, and the main character getting wrapped up in all of that. And it's honestly just really interesting and kind of hilarious as you're following the main character as she's being haunted by her grandmother. And it's set in our modern day, so it's got that aspect to it as well. And I just love the main character in general. She is also queer, she's bisexual, I believe, and there is this huge element of her dealing with her sexuality, but it's also got the fantastical element of this like goddess and the haunting and all of the other stuff. This one will definitely be appealing for someone aging out of YA because it just deals with that transitionary period as you're getting out of school but trying to get into the adult world and like working world, and she's like struggling with jobs as well, so that's a huge aspect. Next I have The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. This is honestly one of my new favorite books. I read it last year and it just blew me away. This is a multi-generational story that all hinges on this main character, Orquídea Divina, and she is sort of the matriarch of this giant family, and she's got multiple descendants and like multiple husbands and that kind of thing. And at the beginning of the book, she's an old woman and she has invited her family and all of her descendants back to her home to receive their inheritance and also witness her death. It's a really interesting and wild situation. This is a book that has a lot of magical realism, which was really fun and interesting to read about, but it's also got a bit of a spooky and sinister element to it as the descendants are slightly being hunted and taken down one by one. What I think will be compelling about this book for someone aging out of YA is that it's not only told from the perspectives of the different descendants, and many of them are quite young and, you know, they're going through their various struggles. There's one main descendant that you'll really be fond of, and she's more of a main character, and she's, I believe, in her 20s, so that aspect is really relatable. But there's also the other timeline going on in this book, which tells you the story of Orquídea's like younger self as she was leaving her home and falling in love, and the bad people that she came into contact with that are now causing trouble many years later. Overall, this is the story of one woman's struggle to find her place in the world, and I think it's just a really beautiful story in a lot of ways, so highly recommend it. Next, I have a book that definitely feels a bit like a YA fantasy, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This book is set in a fantasy world and follows the daughter of this moon goddess, and when her mother is imprisoned, she is sort of set off on this journey to find her place and find a way to free her mother, and she ends up in this crazy love triangle and in these weird situations, and it's a really fun sort of coming of age story, I would say, although it is an adult book, and the main character is in her, I think, early 20s or late teens as well. So she's slightly older, but not that much older. So in that way, I feel like this one really crosses that bridge between YA and adult. And a lot of the struggles that the main character is going through aren't necessarily adult ones, but not necessarily like childish or teen ones. It both weaves together this beautiful fantasy setting, the Chinese mythology and folklore, but it also has so many themes of the main character sort of dealing with her relationship with her mother and how that affects her identity, and trying to make her place in the world and trying not to let the romances of her life dictate her world as well. This was definitely a fun and cute fantasy with an endearing main character, so I'd recommend it for that reason. Alright, the second last book that I have is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is a fun one to pick up if you're aging out of YA, just because the main characters are quite on the young side, like they're in their early 20s. One is a princess, one is a maid, and both of them have lots of secrets going on from their past, and they are coming together in this unlikely situation and end up sort of joining forces in some ways, all set in this world that is going through political upheavals and deals with resistance and power and just shifts of power as well. There's also a sapphic romance in this one that was just really beautiful and I absolutely loved. So if you're into all of those things, I think this is a really great one. Alrighty, and the final book that I have on this list of adult books that you should read if you are usually a YA reader is, of course, my all-time favorite, Kaigei by Vaishnavi Patel. I cannot go without recommending this one just because it actually does hit a lot of the points that I was making before. This is a fantasy, but it follows a main character who is a child actually at the beginning of the book, and you see her age over the course of the book until she's much older by the end of the book. She's not quite in her 20s anymore by the end of the book, but I think her struggles across the book are just so compelling that you cannot help but get like swept forward by the end. If you're someone aging out of YA, I think you'll really relate to the initial parts of the book as the main character is going through those coming of age moments, that transition into adulthood. But then even the parts later on I think are compelling because you've grown with Kaigei this entire time, so you want to see her through to the end. This is a feminist retelling of the ancient Hindu epic, the Ramayana, and it follows a sort of evil stepmother character in the epic and sort of tells her side of the story and how she had reasons for all the decisions that she made in the epic. It's really interesting to just follow her as a character and the different interpersonal relationships that she has with different characters from the epic that we know. And honestly, it was just a story of women helping other women and a woman just looking out for the women around her, which I absolutely appreciated. If you're really into character-driven stories and a story that follows the long life of a single character and how they can be turned into the villain even in their own story, then this is definitely one to pick up. Alrighty, those are all the books that I wanted to talk about today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope those of you who are YA readers have found a new book to pick up that will help you get into the vast world of adult books. As someone who has made that transition, I think it's a really wonderful world out here with adult books. I think there's just so much range to them, and I've just been loving all of the ones that I've been picking up. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these books that I've recommended today, and I would love to hear your recommendations for adult books that people should pick up if they are usually YA readers. And as always, if you guys are interested in hearing more about my regular life, go check out my Instagram and Twitter, Goodreads, and TikTok, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!